Okay, welcome to the second screencast for Chapter 10. Chapter 10, again, is on monopolies. And so we're moving away from that perfectly competitive market or the model of perfect competition, and we're looking at a market or a model in which there's only one firm and they are the only seller. And they're going to do things a little bit differently than we saw in the perfectly competitive market case, all right? So a monopolist has different sort of pricing and output decisions than do perfectly competitive firms, all right? Just to remind you how that works. Perfectly competitive firms are price takers. They cannot affect the price of the market. Buyers and sellers in perfectly competitive markets are price takers. Neither of them can affect the price on their own, all right? Each firm in a perfectly competitive market faces a horizontal demand curve, all right? And I'm going to put that up in a second so you can see what we mean. A monopoly firm is a price maker. They're a price setter. They set the price by choosing the output level that is optimal for them, all right? They are the entire market. And so for the entire market, there is a downward sloping demand curve. As the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down, all the way back to supply and demand for an entire market. That's still true for a monopolist. And since the monopolist is the entire market, their individual demand curve is going to be downward sloping, all right? So here's what that looks like, just to remind you. So this is the competitive firm on this side of the screen, and they have a flat demand curve. What this means is that at the market price, each individual firm can sell whatever quantity they want, all right? And so we know that the way firms decide what to do is they decide by setting the quantity that they individually produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But the firm can hypothetically sell as many as they want at the market price, all right? It's not always profit maximizing to sell more. That's why they stop, and that's what we did in the last chapter. But that's the story for an individual firm in a perfectly competitive market. Now let's contrast this with an individual monopolist in a monopoly market. They are the entire market, all right? So they face the same sort of downward sloping demand curve we see in a market for a perfectly competitive market, all right? Individual firms in a perfectly competitive market face horizontal demand curves, but the overall demand curve for that entire industry, that entire market, is still downward sloping. The monopolist is the entire industry, so they face a downward sloping demand curve, okay? So there is a similarity, though, between monopoly and competitive firms, all right? Profit is still going to be maximized for each individual firm where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that's still the profit maximizing rule for the firm, even if it is in a monopoly, all right? But the difference between a monopoly and competitive firms is that in perfect competition, price equals the marginal revenue, all right? For a monopolist, price is going to be higher than marginal revenue, all right? It's going to be different. The monopolist sets the price, so they're going to set a price that is above marginal revenue. In perfect competition, the firm cannot set the price, so the price is given to them, and so the marginal revenue for selling one more unit of a good is just the price. For a monopolist, that's not going to be the case, all right? To increase output, a monopolist must lower their price, all right? Competitive firms can sell as much as they want at the market price. So that's why you're going to get differences in terms of this being price equals marginal revenue, because you sell one more of the good, you can always do it, and you get the price, all right? For a monopolist, if they sell one more of the good, they have to lower the price. And so that's what's going to make the price have to be greater than marginal revenue. And I'm going to show you that graphically. It's a little easier to see graphically in a second. So there are two effects when the monopolist decides to change the quantity. When the monopoly decreases its price in order to sell more output of units, two things happen. Notice, those things have to go in opposite direction. If they want to sell more, they have to lower the price because they face a downward sloping demand curve. The two effects that happen when they decrease their price to sell more output, first is the price effect. All the units are now sold at a lower price. By itself, that's a loss for the firm, all right? So all the units that they're selling now are being sold for a lower price. That's not good. But they're now selling more of the good, and so that's a good thing, all right? More units are sold. By itself, this is a good thing for the firm. And so there's going to be a trade-off, and there's going to be a point at which if they keep lowering their price, they're actually going to be decreasing their profits, all right? So we'll see that in a second in a graph, all right? So here it is just as a chart, all right? So let's bring in, we're going to have the quantity, the number of customers the firm serves, the price for the good, the total revenue, which is just price times quantity, and then this is marginal revenue. So as I increase the customer one more, how much more revenue do I get? Well, we're going to do 1,000 customers at a time here, okay? So all it is just going to be the change in the total revenue. So for example, when I have no customers, the price is 100, price times quantity is 0, and there's no marginal revenue because I'm still at 0. Now I'm going to move to 1,000 customers. I have to lower the price because demand is downward sloping. If I want to sell more, I have to lower the price. Total revenue is 90,000, so that means the change in total revenue from 0 to 90,000 is 90,000. So that's my marginal revenue. For 2,000 customers, I have to lower the price to say 80. 80 times 2,000 is 160,000. That's my total revenue. Marginal revenue, again, is the increase from 90 to 60, which is 70,000. When I go to 3,000, the price falls to 70. Total revenue increases to 210,000, which is just 70 times 3,000. And so that is a marginal revenue of 50,000. And so forth with 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000, 90,000, 10,000 customers. All right. So notice price is going down as the quantity goes up. That's just because demand slopes down for this firm. All right. This is price. This is quantity. There is an inverse relationship between the two. All right. So notice total revenue is just price times quantity. Through these numbers of customers, total revenue is actually increasing. That's why I have the arrow colored green here. All right. For these customers, as I add more and more customers, the total revenue starts to decrease. Notice total revenue is going down. What's going on here? I'm selling to more and more people, more and more items. Why would my total revenue be going down? Well, it's because total revenue is not just the quantity that you sell, it's the quantity times the price. And the price has to fall because the monopolist firm faces a downward sloping demand curve. All right. So notice for this range of increasing customers, for 60, 70, 80, 90,000, my marginal revenue is actually negative. So the firm never wants negative marginal revenue, okay? And I put this here, it's been here through the whole building of the chart, that there's an inverse relationship between output and price because of that downward sloping demand curve, okay? So let's look at this graphically. So here is our monopolist and what it looks like in a graph. So this is the market demand, all right? The amount of customers that we're selling to. But notice marginal revenue now is this curve. And you can go back to that chart, pause a second, rewind a little, to see that marginal revenue is always twice as steep as the demand curve. Always twice as steep as the demand curve for the monopolist. So this is the marginal revenue curve, and you could even draw it going negative because we saw in that last graph that marginal revenue can be negative. But for now, let's just leave it here, all right? So if the firm has a price of 70 and they're selling 3 to 3,000 customers, what is their total revenue? It's this area here. The red area is their total revenue, okay? Now, let's assume that they lower their price to 60 so that they can sell 4,000 units of the good, or to 4,000 customers. What is the total revenue now? Well, it's just price times quantity, which is this area in green, all right? So notice there are two effects here. They lowered their price. That's going to be the loss to the firm. So this leads into a loss of $30,000 in revenue, right? 10 times 3,000 is 30,000. But it leads to an increase in revenue of, let's see, 60, right, times 10. I'm sorry, times 1,000. 60 times 1,000, which is $60,000. So they lost $30,000 in revenue by decreasing the price and increasing the quantity, but they increased their revenue by $60,000. So this is still good. This is still positive. They probably want to keep increasing the quantity that they produce, all right? Because so far, the increase in quantity offsets the revenue due to the increase in quantity offsets the revenue loss because of the lower price.